For 19 years, the moon over Ardenmoor had never once shown her full face. The old people said it was punishment. They said the moon court had broken faith, and the sky had turned away, and that was the end of the matter. Whatever the reason, the proof was written in the ground. The wheat came up thin and gray, the rivers ran with salt, and the wolves of Ardenmoor, who had run under a full moon since before there were kings to count the years, could no longer shift. A whole people, locked out of half of themselves. Their king rode the salt road that spring, and he did not ride to conquer anything. He rode to beg. Alpha King Ronan of Ardenmoor had a hall, a crown, a warband, and nothing to feed any of them. So he went to the one man in the north who still had green fields, Warden Corwin Vale of Thornhold, and he asked for passage through the mountain and grain for his people, and he did it with his own hands open. His council told him a king should not ask. Ronan told his council that a king who let his people starve in order to keep his pride was not a king. He was an ornament. He had made a vow, too, when he was 9 years old and bleeding into his own palm, and he had never once let himself forget it. Find what was stolen from the moon court, or die somewhere on the road looking. He came into the courtyard of Thornhold at dusk, saddle-sore and 12 days unwashed, and a bondservant in a gray headscarf brought him a cup of water. That was all. A cup of water, in a plain clay cup, held out by a girl nobody in that yard could be troubled to name. And the wolf inside him, the wolf that had not made a sound in 19 years, the wolf he had privately begun to believe was dead, lifted its head and looked at her. He drank. He handed the cup back. He said thank you, because he had been raised to say it, and the girl looked so startled by 2 ordinary words that he nearly asked her what was wrong. Then Warden Vale came down the steps, with his arms spread and his welcome ready, and the moment closed over like water closing over a stone. Neither of them knew it yet, but the thing his whole kingdom was dying for had just poured him a drink and gone back to the kitchen. Chapter 1. Wren woke in the dark, the way she had woken every morning for as long as she could remember, which was not as long as it should have been. That was the thing she never said out loud. Other people had childhoods. Nessa the cook could tell you about her own mother's hands and the color of the door of the house she was born in. The stable boys could tell you where they had lost their first tooth. Wren's memory began at 4 years old, in the kitchen of Thornhold, with a bowl of barley in front of her and the taste of salt in the back of her throat. Before that, there was nothing. Not darkness even. Just a blank place where a life should have been, smooth as a swept floor. She had decided a long time ago that she would not let it frighten her. There was too much to do before breakfast to be frightened. She dressed in the loft above the ovens, where the heat came up through the boards, and she tied her headscarf the way she had tied it since she was small, low across the brow, tucked behind the ears, hiding the streak of silver-white hair that grew at her left temple. Nessa had taught her that knot before she taught her to read. People talk, Nessa had said. Give them nothing to talk about, and they will find someone else. At the throat of her shift there was a scar, a thin ring of white, perfect as something drawn with a compass, all the way around the base of her neck. Nessa said it was a burn from a fever year, a poultice left on too long. Wren had believed that for 19 years, because a child believes what the only kind person in the house tells her, and because the alternative was a question she did not know how to ask. She went down and lit the ovens. She set the barley. She counted the stores. She did not need a ledger for that. She never had. Wren carried the whole larder in her head, every sack and every crock, what came in and what went out, and what was quietly walking off with the steward's cousin. She could tell you to the day when the salt fish would run out. She had told the steward once, 3 years ago, and he had told her that a kitchen drudge does not do arithmetic in front of her betters, and she had gone on doing it in her head where nobody could take it away from her. That was the shape of her life, not chains, Nothing so dramatic as chains. Just a very long list of things that were not hers. Her wages were not hers, because a bondservant works against a debt she never contracted and cannot see the sum of. Her hours were not hers. Her name, most days, was not hers. In 9 years of serving that hall, she had heard the word girl perhaps 10,000 times, and her own name maybe twice a month, and only ever from Nessa. But some things she kept. She kept her mornings, the blue hour before anyone else came down, when the kitchen was only hers and the ovens breathed. She kept the mountain, because nobody else wanted it. She kept her name in her own mouth. And she kept the rhyme. Nessa had taught it to her when she was small, singing it over the bread. The moon keeps nothing that is taken. The moon keeps only what is given. And what is given to the moon, she thought, comes back to you twice over. It was nonsense, obviously. Kitchen nonsense, the kind old women sing. Wren sang it anyway, under her breath, in the blue hour, because it was hers. At sunrise, the household woke, and the day landed on her like a load of wet firewood. Steward Gant came down first, as he always did, thin and precise and cold as a key. He looked at the pots. He looked at the fire. He looked at Wren the way a man looks at a chair that is slightly out of place. Water for the upper rooms, Gant said. Then the yard. Then the linen. The warden wants the hall floors scrubbed to the second door. Wren said that the hall floors had been scrubbed to the second door the day before. Gant said, then they will be very clean. She did not argue. She had learned that arguing with Gant cost more than it bought, and Wren was careful with what she spent. But she thought, as she hauled the first buckets across the yard, that there was something strange in the air that morning. Thornhold was being tidied. Thornhold was never tidied. She stopped in the middle of the yard with the water slopping over her wrists and looked, really looked, at the fields below the wall. Green. Deep, absurd, insulting green, rolling down the terraces toward the river, heavy-headed barley in a year when the whole of Ardenmoor was eating gray bread and grinding acorns. Wren had heard the traders talk. She had heard them say the words salt and dust and nothing over and over about every valley south of the pass. And here sat Thornhold in its green bowl like a fat man at a famine table, and nobody in that house ever said one word about why. She realized, standing there with cold water running down her arms, that she had never once let herself finish that thought. Because there was a thing she did for the warden, on the dark of every moon, that she also never let herself finish thinking about. Wren shivered, and it had nothing to do with the water, and she carried the buckets up the stairs. Nessa was in the kitchen when she came back down, up to her elbows in dough, and Nessa said, without looking up, that she was to stay out of sight tonight. Wren asked why. Because the king is coming, Nessa said. The Alpha King himself, down the salt road with 24 men, and the warden has been in a lather since the rider came. Wren set the empty buckets down and said that she had never seen a king. And you still won't, said Nessa, and there was something under the flour on her face that Wren could not read. Something old and tight. Keep that scarf on, my heart. Keep your head down. Kings look at things. Then the horn sounded from the gate tower, one long note and two short, and every dog in Thornhold started to scream. Chapter 2. Wren was not supposed to be in the courtyard when the king came in, and she was in the courtyard when the king came in, because Gant had sent her to fetch the water jugs from the well, and then forgotten that he had. So she was standing by the trough with a clay cup in her hand when the gate opened and the riders came through. She had expected gold. That was foolish, and she knew it was foolish even as she thought it. But she had spent 19 years in a kitchen, and her whole idea of kings came out of Nessa's stories. She had expected a crown, a banner, a man carried in on other people's shoulders. What came through the gate was 26 exhausted men on 26 exhausted horses, mud to the shoulder, gray with road dust, in gear that had been mended and mended again. And at the head of them, a man who swung down out of the saddle before anyone could bring him a block, and put his hand on his horse's neck first, before he looked at the house at all. He was tall and dark-haired and younger than she had pictured, perhaps 8 or 9 years older than she was. There was a long white scar across his left palm that she noticed when he turned his hand over. His eyes were the color of amber held up to a candle, and they were tired in a way Wren recognized, because she saw it in the traders and the shepherds and in Nessa. It was the tiredness of somebody who is carrying more than one person can carry, and has decided not to mention it. He did not look like a king. He looked like a man who had once been told he was responsible for everything, and had believed it. The horses smelled the water. Wren, without thinking, because it was the only thing she knew how to do in a courtyard, filled the clay cup and held it out to him. He looked at the cup. Then he looked at her, and something happened to his face. Wren could not have said what it was. His expression barely moved. But she felt the courtyard change temperature, the way a room changes when someone comes in behind you and you do not yet know they are there. Her heart went hard and quick against her ribs. The ring of scar tissue at her throat, which she had never once felt in her life, went suddenly, distinctly cold, like a band of river water laid across her skin. The Alpha King took the cup out of her hand. He drank. He handed it back. "Thank you," he said. 2 words, ordinary words. Wren had heard men say worse things to dogs. She stood there like an idiot with the empty cup while every reasonable answer went out of her head, and then Warden Vale was coming down the steps of the hall with his arms wide and his voice filling the yard, and the moment was over. Corwin Vale was a handsome man in his 6th decade, silver at the temples, with a laugh he could produce the way other men produce a coin. Wren had watched him work rooms her entire life. He was very good. He put his hand on the king's shoulder as though they were old friends, though Wren knew for a fact they had met exactly twice, and he said something about the honor and the hour and the state of the road, and he steered the king toward the doors. Ronan stopped halfway up the steps. He turned around, and he looked back down at the girl by the trough, and he said, "What is your name?" The courtyard went quiet. Wren felt the quiet arrive, and she did not understand it at first. There were perhaps 30 people in that yard. Grooms, guards, the laundry women, Gant on the step with his hands folded, the warden himself with his mouth slightly open. All of them had known her for years. Some of them had known her since she was 4 years old and small enough to sleep in a breadbasket. And not one of them answered. Not one of them could. It was Wren who broke it. She said, "Wren, my lord." Ronan nodded slowly, as if she had told him something considerably longer than one word. "Wren," he said. "Thank you for the water, Wren." Then he went inside, and Vale went in after him, talking twice as fast as before, and the yard came back to life all at once, everyone very busy, nobody looking at anybody. Gant came down the steps. He said very quietly that she was to be in the cellars for the rest of the evening, and that if he saw her in the upper house again during the king's visit, she would find the terms of her bond reviewed. Wren said, "Yes, steward." She carried the water in. Her hands were shaking, and she could not think why. That night, in the loft above the ovens, she lay on her back and listened to the house celebrate a king it could not feed on grain it should not have had. And she thought about the way the courtyard had gone silent. It was not that they had refused to say her name, she realized. That would have been a kind of cruelty, and cruelty at least means somebody is paying attention. They simply had not known it. 19 years in the same house, and she had been furniture. And she thought, with a heat behind her eyes that she was too tired to be ashamed of, that a stranger who had ridden 12 days on a bad road had been the first person in her life to ask. Then she remembered what night it was, the dark of the moon. Wren stopped crying at once, because there was no time for it. She got up in the black and found her boots. Chapter 3. Under Thornhold, below the wine cellar and below the room where they kept the salted meat, there was a door. It was old. It was older than the hall above it by a great many years, oak faced with iron, set into raw mountain stone, and it did not belong to the house. The house had been built on top of it, the way a farm gets built on top of a grave. Vale kept the key. Twice a month, on the dark of the moon, Gant brought it down and unlocked the door and stood back, and Wren went through. She had been doing this since she was 7 years old. Nobody had ever explained it to her. When she was small, she had been told it was a duty of the house, and that duties of the house are not discussed. And when she got older and asked properly, Vale himself had come down and crouched to her level and told her, kindly, that Thornhold sat over an old well, and that the old well was temperamental, and that for reasons nobody understood the water went still and sweet when Wren was in the room, and went sour when she was not. He said that the fields drank from that well. He said that everyone in the valley, all 900 of them, ate because of what she did down there. It was the only time in her life anyone had told her she mattered, and he had been careful to tell her while she was standing in the dark. The stair went down a long way. The air got colder and thinner, and began to smell of stone and old iron and something sweet underneath, like frost on cut grass. At the bottom was the cradle. It was a round chamber, and in the middle of it was a wide, shallow basin of pale stone, big enough to lie down in, filled with black water that never moved. Around the rim of the basin were letters cut deep into the stone in a script Wren had never seen anywhere else in her life, and she had never been able to read them, and she had never been able to stop looking at them either. On a hook by the basin hung the ring. It was salt iron, gray and dull, the size of a bracelet, and it was cold in a way that ordinary metal is not cold. Wren took it down. She knelt at the edge of the basin and she rolled her sleeves, and she put both hands and the ring into the black water. Then she waited. It always went the same way. First the cold, so hard it made her teeth ache. Then, slowly, the water around her hands began to warm. That was the part she hated. It warmed by degrees, and as it warmed, something went out of her, and she could feel it going, a long, slow drawing off, like a fever leaving, except that a fever leaves you lighter, and this left her hollow. Wren knelt there in the dark with her arms in the water and thought about nothing, because thinking made it worse, and she recited the rhyme in her head to keep from counting. The moon keeps nothing that is taken. The moon keeps only what is given. The water warmed. The letters around the rim of the basin came up faintly silver, the way frost comes up on a window, and then faded. When it was done, Wren took her hands out. She hung the ring back on its hook. She climbed the stair on her hands and knees for the first 20 steps because her legs would not hold her, which was ordinary. And she went up through the cellar past Gant, who locked the door behind her without a word, which was also ordinary. She would be sick for 2 days now. That was ordinary too. The kitchen would take it out of her hide, and Nessa would quietly do half her work and tell nobody. 2 floors above her head, at that same hour, the Alpha King of Ardenmoor was asking Warden Corwin Vale for permission to cross the pass. Wren heard about it later, in pieces, the way servants hear everything. She heard that the king had not asked for tribute or soldiers or a marriage. He had asked for 2 things: grain, which Vale granted at once and loudly, in front of witnesses, in a quantity that made him look enormously generous and cost him about a tenth of what he had. And passage through the widow's stair, the high pass above Thornhold, so that the king could ride down the far side and reach the ruins of Silvermere. That was where Vale had stopped smiling. "The pass is closed," Vale had said. "The pass has been closed for 19 years. There is nothing on the other side but a burned house and bad weather." And the king had said, "Then it will cost you nothing to let me look at it." Wren, hearing it repeated in the scullery, felt the name go through her like a struck bell. Silvermere. She had never been there. She had never heard anyone in that house say the word out loud in her entire life. And she understood, standing there with her hands in the greasy water and her whole body still hollow from the cradle, that this was itself a strange thing. Ardenmoor had lost a royal house 19 years ago, and Thornhold had simply never mentioned it. That night she dreamed for the first time in years. She dreamed of a white room with tall windows and no roof, and snow coming down through it, and a woman's voice close to her ear, saying a name over and over. Wren could not hear the name. She could hear the shape of it. It had 3 parts, and it was not Wren, and the woman who said it was frightened and would not let go of her. She woke on the flour sacks with her face wet and the cold ring of scar at her throat burning like a brand. And when she went down at dawn to light the ovens, there was frost on the inside of the kitchen window, in a year with no frost left in it, and the frost had made a shape on the glass. It was not a leaf. It was not a fern. It was a ring of small points, evenly spaced, like a crown. Chapter 4. The king's men stayed 9 days, waiting on the warden's answer, and in those 9 days Wren learned 2 things about the Alpha King of Ardenmoor. The first was that he did not sleep. She knew because she was up before anyone, and he was already in the yard most mornings, standing at the wall looking south with his hands on the stone, in the blue hour that she had always thought of as hers. He never spoke to her. He never seemed to notice her at all. But he was there, in her hour, and after the 3rd morning she stopped resenting it, and after the 5th she caught herself bringing out 2 cups instead of 1, and setting the 2nd on the wall about 6 feet away from him, and walking off before he could turn around. He always drank it. He always washed the cup himself and set it back on the step, which no high-born man in that house had done in the history of the world. The second thing she learned was that he was hurt. She saw it on the 6th day, when he lifted a fallen beam off a groom in the stable yard with 3 other men, and something in his right shoulder gave. He did not make a sound. He just went a shade grayer and let the beam down carefully, and walked away with his arm held wrong. Wren waited until the yard cleared. Then she got her basket and went to find him, because she had never in her life been able to walk past something that was broken. He was in the herb shed at the end of the stable row, sitting on an upturned crate with his shirt off one shoulder, trying to get at his own back with a strip of linen, and failing, and swearing quietly in a language she did not know. Wren said, "That is not going to work." The king turned his head. Then he said, "No, it is not." She came in and put her basket down and looked at the wound, and she stopped. It was old. That was the first surprise. A blade had gone into the meat of his shoulder from behind, years ago, and it had healed badly and torn open again, and the flesh around it was angry and would not close. But it was the shape of the old scar that made her stare. It was long and clean, and it did not run the way a sword wound runs. She said, "This is a spear, and it went in while you were carrying something heavy." Ronan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How could you possibly know that?" Wren said that a man who is running takes a spear high in the back, and it slides. A man who is carrying weight leans forward, and it goes in straight and deep, and it ruins the muscle underneath. She said she had seen it twice, in shepherds who had been caught by raiders on the pass, and both of them had been carrying a lamb. She realized, hearing herself, that she had said all of that to a king, in a shed, in her apron. Ronan said, "I was carrying a boy. He was 6. We got out." Wren said, "And you didn't get it set properly." "There was no one to set it properly," Ronan said. "It was not that kind of night." She cleaned it. She packed it with yarrow and the gray moss that grew on the north face above the pass, and that nobody else in Thornhold could be bothered to climb for. And she bound it, and while she worked they talked, and Wren thought later that it was the first real conversation of her adult life. He asked her about the mountain, and she told him about the mountain, the good water and the bad water, the shelf where the wind comes up like a hand, which slopes hold snow into summer. He asked how she knew, and she said because someone has to go up for salt and moss, and nobody else wants to. And he said, "That is not an answer to how you know it so well." And Wren said, "All right, because it is quiet up there." Ronan said, "Quiet is worth walking for." He asked her, carefully, how long she had been bonded to the house. She told him 19 years, and watched his jaw go tight, and she said, before he could say the sympathetic thing, that she did not want to be pitied in her own kitchen by a man who would be gone in a week. To his credit, he did not flinch. He said, "That is fair." Then he said, "But I will say one thing, and then I will leave it. A debt a child never agreed to is not a debt. It is a story a man tells to keep the labor cheap. You should know that somebody said it to you out loud once." Wren tied off the bandage. She did not trust her voice for a moment. She said, "Why are you going to Silvermere?" And the Alpha King told her. He told her that when he was 9 years old, he had been a fosterling at the Moon Court, along with the sons and daughters of every wolf house in the north, because that was how it had always been done. He told her that the Moon Court did not rule Ardenmoor. It kept something for Ardenmoor. He said the old word for it was the moontide, and that nobody could explain it properly, but that it lived in the blood of the Moon Court's air, and it was the reason the wolves of the north could shift at all. He told her that on a night in winter, 19 years ago, Silvermere burned, and the Moon Court died in it, and the heir, a girl of 3, was never found. And since that night, he said, the moon has not once come full over this country. The rivers turn to salt, nothing grows properly, and no man or woman of my people has worn their other shape in 19 years. There is a whole generation now that has never run. They think I made it up." Wren said, "The old people say it is a punishment." "The old people are wrong," Ronan said. "I have never once believed it, and I have never been able to prove it, and it has cost me almost everything I have to keep saying so out loud." She asked him what he thought instead. Ronan looked at his own left hand, at the long white scar across the palm. He said, "I think somebody took something, and I think the sky has been waiting 19 years for it to be given back." He left the shed. Wren stood alone among the drying herbs, with her heart going like a bird in a box. And behind her, halfway across the yard, the Alpha King of Ardenmoor stopped walking, because for the first time since he was 9 years old, the wolf inside him had said something. One word. Not even a word, really. A pull, low and certain, the way the tide is certain. Hers. Ronan stood in the middle of the stable yard with his heart hammering and did not dare turn around. Chapter 5. On the 9th day, Vale gave his answer, and his answer was no. He gave it beautifully. He spoke about the danger of the stair, the loss of good men, the responsibility he carried for the pass, the memory of the last party who had tried it. He offered instead a second wagon of grain and an escort as far as the lower road, and his profound and personal regret. Ronan said that he would go and look at the stair himself in the morning with 4 men, and that the warden was welcome to have him watched. Vale said the guides would not take him. Ronan said he had not asked for guides. Wren heard all of this in the scullery within the hour, because the scullery hears everything, and she stood there with a pot in her hands and made a decision that changed her entire life. She went out to the yard that evening, and she said, in front of the king's second and 2 of his men, that she would take them up. Cassian, the king's second, a broad, quiet man with a boxer's nose, said, "You." Wren said that she had been on the widow's stair 4 times a year since she was 11, that she knew where the ice bridges went bad and where the snow lay rotten over the cracks, and that if they went up with a Thornhold guide, the Thornhold guide would take them to the 3rd shoulder, declare it impassable, and walk them home by supper. Cassian looked at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, once, like a man surprised into it, and said, "My lady, we leave at dawn." She said, "Do not call me that," and she went back inside with her ears burning. They went up in the dark. Wren, the king, Cassian, and a boy called Tam, who was 17 and had been given to the war band by an aunt who could not feed him and who talked constantly. The widow's stair was not a road. It had been a road once, and there were places where you could still see the old cut stone under the scree, but 19 bad winters had taken most of it. They climbed with rope and hands. Wren went first because Wren knew it, and after the first hour nobody made any comment about that at all. She thought, somewhere on the 2nd shoulder, with the wind coming up the face like a hand, that she had never in her life been so happy. Nobody was telling her to fetch anything. Nobody was calling her girl. She was the one who knew, and 4 grown men were doing what she said, and the cold air was full of stone dust, and she could see 50 miles. At the ice bridge, everything went wrong. It spanned a gully about 30 feet across, and Wren went out on it first with the rope round her waist and tested it and called back that it would hold if they came one at a time and kept to the left. Cassian came. The king came. And Tam, 17 and eager and talking, came third and did not keep to the left. The ice went with a sound like a door slamming somewhere far away. Wren did not think. There was no thought in it at all. She was already moving before the noise finished, flat on her belly, spreading her weight, one arm hooked around the anchor rope and the other going down into the hole after him. She got a fistful of his collar. He was too heavy. He was going to take her with him. "Get back!" Ronan shouted from the far side. Wren shouted no, and she shouted it in a voice that stopped a king in his tracks, because she had spent 19 years learning exactly how much weight a thing will bear. And she knew this ice, and she knew the ledge under it, and she needed 6 more inches of rope and 2 seconds and a boy who would stop kicking. "Tam," she said quite calmly into the hole, "stop kicking. Put your right foot down and to the side. There is a shelf. It is there. Put your foot on it." He put his foot on it. The weight came off her arm. Cassian got the rope. They had him out in a count of 20, and all 4 of them lay on the snow, gasping like landed fish. Tam sat up and burst into tears and apologized to everyone, including the mountain. And Wren, flat on her back with her lungs burning, opened her eyes and looked up. The moon had come out. Not full. It had not been full in 19 years, but it was up there behind the thin cloud, a pale slice of it, and it was the middle of the night at 8,000 feet with no lamp within a day's walk. Ronan, kneeling beside her, went absolutely still, because her eyes had gone silver. Not gray, not pale, silver, edge to edge, catching the moon and holding it the way water holds a light, and in the same moment the wind took the torn end of her headscarf, which had come loose in the fall, and pulled it back off her temple. Under it, running from the hairline back, was a streak of hair as white as the snow she was lying on. Wren felt the air on her scalp and sat up fast and yanked the scarf down, and by the time she looked at him, her eyes were only gray again. She said, "Don't." Ronan said nothing at all. She said, "It is a birthmark. It is hair. Half the girls in the valley have something." Ronan said, still nothing, and that was worse, and Wren got up and coiled her rope and said they should go down before the wind turned. They went down. Nobody spoke. And behind her the whole way, Wren could feel the Alpha King of Ardenmoor looking at the back of her head, like a man reading a page he had been searching for his entire life. Chapter 6. He went to Nessa. Wren did not know that until much later. He did it at midnight, in the kitchen, alone, and he did it by sitting down at the table like an ordinary man and saying, "I am not going to threaten you, and I am not going to offer you money, so please, just listen." Nessa the cook had worked in that house for 41 years. She was 70 years old, her back was ruined, and she had exactly one thing left in the world that she loved. Ronan said, 19 years ago, in the winter, somebody brought a child to this house. Nessa put down her spoon. He said, "I do not want to hurt her. I want you to understand that first, because if you tell me nothing, I will go away and she will spend the rest of her life in this kitchen. And if you tell me the truth, I will spend the rest of mine making sure she never scrubs another floor." And Nessa, who had kept it for 19 years, and who was old, and who was tired, put both hands flat on the table and told him. She said a rider came in the black of the night in the worst week of that winter, with a bundle under his coat, and the warden took the bundle himself at the door, and did not let anyone else touch it. She said the bundle was a child of about 3 years old, and she was wrapped in a cloak of pale gray wool that had salt worked into the weave, so much salt that it had gone stiff as board, and she was not asleep. She was awake and silent, and she did not cry once. And Nessa had been putting children to bed for 30 years, and she had never seen anything so wrong. She said the child had a ring of raw, burned skin all the way around her throat. She said the warden told the household that it was a bondswoman's orphan out of the south, taken in charity, and that the debt of her keep would be worked off in the usual way. She said the child could not speak for a year. She said that when she did speak again, she had no memory of anything before that kitchen, and Nessa had thanked God for it, and had taught her to tie her scarf over the white hair, and had never in 19 years said one word. Ronan asked her why not. Nessa said, "Because the rider who brought her did not ride out again, my lord. Nobody ever saw that man leave this house." Ronan sat there in the kitchen with his hands flat on the table and did not move for a long time. Then he said, "Do you still have the cloak?" And Nessa said, "I have had it under my own floor for 19 years. In the morning he went to Corwinvale. He did it properly, in the warden's own study, with only Cassian and Elder Hallow present, and he laid it out plainly. He said that he had reason to believe the bondservant called Wren had been brought to this house in the winter of the burning, from the south, at 3 years of age, with a salt mark on her throat. He said the moontide runs in the moon court's blood. He said that he intended to take her south to Silvermere and put her hand on the stone of her own house and see what happened. And Warden Corwinvale did not shout, and did not deny it, and did not go pale. He went to his cabinet and unlocked it, and he took out a flat, lead-lined box, and out of the box he took a document, and he laid it on the desk in front of the Alpha King of Ardenmoor. It was old, and it was water-stained, and it carried 3 seals. It was a death record, entered in the register of the Moon Court in the spring after the burning, listing the dead of the house by name, and the last name on it was the heir. Alara of Silvermere, 3 years of age, found in the West Wing, burned beyond recognition, identified by the silver ring she wore on a cord at her throat. The seals were the Moon Court's own. The hand was the Moon Court's own steward's hand. Vale said, very quietly, that he had ridden south himself in the spring of that year, because he had loved that house too, and that he had brought this back, and that he had never shown it to anyone, because there was no kindness in it. He said, "Majesty, I have watched you look for that child for 19 years, and I have watched what it has cost you, and I would have spared you this if I could." Ronan looked at the seals for a long time. Cassian said afterward that he had never seen his king look like that, not at a funeral, not at a battle, like something had been taken out from under him. That night, Warden Corwin Vale went down to his own study alone and wrote a short letter and sealed it and gave it to a rider with instructions to go south by the low road and not to stop. And then he went and stood a long time at the window above the courtyard, looking down at the kitchen door, at the strip of light under it where a girl was still working at midnight because she had been raised to, and he said out loud to nobody that he had kept 900 people alive. Chapter 7. "Here is the shape of the thing," said plainly, "because it is easy to lose in all the smoke. One girl had carried the moon of a whole country in her blood since she was 3 years old. One man had made very sure she never found out. And the entire North had been starving for 19 years so that one valley could stay green. Nobody in that hall knew all 3 parts of it yet, but they were about to say them out loud in the same room. It happened at the war table on the last night, and it happened by accident, which is how most true things get said. Vale had put on a farewell supper. The king was leaving in the morning. The grain was loaded. The pass was closed and would stay closed, and Ronan had accepted it, or had looked as though he had, and there was a document in a lead-lined box that had taken the last of his hope out of him and left him very quiet. Wren was serving. Gant had put her back in the hall for the feast because there were not enough hands, having entirely forgotten his own threat, which was the most honest thing about him. And Elder Hallow, who was 80 and had drunk enough to become philosophical, told the story. He told it the way it was always told. He said the Moon Court had grown proud. He said they had held the moontide as a possession instead of a trust. He said the sky had seen it and covered her face and turned away from Ardenmoor, and that everything since had been the punishment of a people for the sin of a house. He said, "And so we bear it." And there were men at that table who nodded, and Wren, standing at the sideboard with a jug in her hand, said, "That is not how it goes." She did not mean to say it. She heard it come out of her mouth, and she thought, with perfect clarity, "Oh, I have ended my life." Vale said, "Girl." Ronan said, "Let her speak." Wren stood there with 30 men looking at her and the blood roaring in her ears, and she thought, "If I am going to be thrown out of this house for a sentence, I would rather it were a whole one." She said, "My Lord Hallow has it backward. It is not a punishment. It is a vigil." She said that the old rhyme did not say the moon turned her face away. It said the moon covers her face. And a woman covers her face for grief, not for anger. She said the rhyme was about a thing bound and not a thing punished, and everyone had been singing it wrong for 19 years because the 2 words sound the same in the old speech, and nobody in a kitchen bothers to check. Hallow, who had not been spoken to like that in 40 years, leaned forward with his mouth open and said, "Say it. Say the whole of it." And Wren, who had sung it over bread since she was 4 years old, said it. "The moon keeps nothing that is taken. The moon keeps only what is given. And what is given to the moon comes back to you twice over. So cover your face, mother, and wait. The child is not lost. The child is held. and the salt cannot hold what is given. The hall went completely silent. Elder Hallow sat back very slowly. He said, "Into that silence, the child is not lost, the child is held." He looked at his king. He said, "Majesty, that is not a lament, that is a report." And everything happened at once. Ronan was on his feet. Cassian was on his feet. Hallow was saying that the moon does not mourn a dead heir, the moon mourns a bound one, and that if the sky had been in vigil for 19 years, then the girl of Silvermere had been alive that entire time. And Vale was saying that this was a kitchen rhyme, a nursery song, that half the valleys in the north had a version, and Ronan was saying, "Where did you learn it?" And Wren, holding the jug like a shield, said, "From Nessa, when I was small." Ronan said, "Wren, take off your scarf." The hall turned, and Corwin Vale, who had run out of time and knew it, did the only thing left to him. He reached into his coat and put the document on the table, and he said, in a voice of enormous and genuine sorrow, that he had prayed to be spared this. He read it out. He read the seals. He read the name and the age and the silver ring on the cord. He said that the heir of Silvermere had died in the west wing of a burning house 19 years ago and been buried under her own stone, and that he had knelt at that stone himself. Then he looked at Wren, and he said, "And this is a bondservant of my household, who is sick with fever twice a month, who cannot read, who has never been further than the third shoulder of the stair, and who has just been told in front of an entire hall that a king is looking for a lost princess." He did not accuse her of anything. He did not have to. He let the room do it. Wren felt it go around the table like water finding a crack. She saw men who had eaten food she cooked for 9 days look at her and decide. And she turned to the only person in that hall who knew about the ice bridge and the silver in her eyes and the white in her hair, and she waited. Ronan looked at the seals. He looked at the 40 armed men of Thornhold standing along the walls of a house that was not his, 12 days from his own border, with 24 tired men and a wagon of grain his people needed to survive the summer. And the Alpha King of Ardenmoor said, "She is a servant of this house, nothing more. Let it go." He said it to buy her a night. He said it because he had counted the men on the walls and knew exactly what would happen to her the moment he named her out loud in Corwin Vale's own hall. And he intended to be 20 miles up the road with her before dawn. He was right about the danger, and he was right about the count, and none of that mattered in the slightest. Because Wren heard the words, and only the words. She set the jug down on the sideboard, very carefully, because it was not hers to break, and she walked out of the hall. Chapter 8. Nessa found her in the loft above the ovens, packing. There was not much to pack. That was the part that stopped Wren for a moment, kneeling on the boards with everything she owned in front of her. 2 shifts, a wooden comb, a knife, a tin of the gray moss from the north face. 19 years. Nessa said, "My heart." Wren said, "Don't. If you say a kind thing to me right now, I will not be able to leave, and I am leaving." "Where?" said Nessa. "South," Wren said, "over the stair and down the far side to Silvermere. I know the ice. I know the shelf where the wind comes up. I can be over the top by noon." Nessa said, "And then what?" And Wren said the thing she had been holding in her teeth since the hall. She said, "Then I put my hand on the stone of that house, and either something happens or nothing does. And if nothing happens, then I am a kitchen girl with white hair and a fever, and I will have found that out standing on my own feet at the top of a mountain, instead of being told it by 2 men in a room." She said, "I am so tired of finding out who I am by listening." Nessa sat down on the flour sacks. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Wait here." She came back up the ladder with a bundle wrapped in sacking, and she put it in Wren's lap, and her hands were shaking. Inside was a cloak. It was small, that was the first thing. It was a child's cloak, pale gray, and the wool had gone stiff and gritted, and when Wren rubbed the hem between her fingers, it left salt on her skin like flour. Nessa said, "You came into this house in that. I took it off you myself, and I hid it under my own hearthstone that same hour, and I have been afraid of it for 19 years. Wren could not speak. Nessa said, "There is more." And she turned back the hem, where somebody in a burning house had folded the wool over twice and sewn it down with big, desperate stitches, the kind you make in the dark, and she cut the threads with Wren's own knife. 2 things fell out into Wren's lap. The first was a ring, a small silver ring on a rotted cord, sized for a child of 3, and around the inside of the band there were letters cut in a script Wren had seen exactly once in her life. On the rim of a stone basin, under a house, in the dark. The second was a strip of linen, folded to the size of a leaf, and on it in brown faded ink were 4 words in a woman's hand. Her name is Alara. Wren sat on the floor of a kitchen loft with her whole life in her lap. She thought about the death record, and the seal, and the silver ring on the cord that had identified the burned child in the West Wing. She thought, they buried a ring. And then she thought, no, they did not even do that, because the ring is here. She thought about a man who had ridden south in the spring of that year and come back with a document, and who kept the key to a door under his own house, and who had 900 green acres in a country of salt. And Wren, who had never once let herself finish a thought about the cradle, finished it. She said, out loud, in the dark, "Oh." Nessa said, "What?" Wren said, "Nessa, what do you think I have been doing down there twice a month since I was 7 years old?" She was on the ladder before she finished the sentence. She had the cloak and the ring and the note inside her shirt. She had one thought in her head, which was to reach the Alpha King of Ardenmoor and put a silver ring in his hand and watch his face. And she was so full of it that she went out through the kitchen door into the yard at a dead run without looking. Steward Gant was waiting in the yard with 6 men. He said, "The warden thought you might." Wren fought. She wants that said, because it is true. She got her knife out, and she put it into the arm of the man who took her from behind, and she broke Gant's nose with the back of her own head, and it took 6 of them to get her across the yard, and she did not stop until they put the salt iron on her wrists. She felt it the instant it closed. The cold came up her arms and into her chest, and the whole world went quiet and far away, like her head had been pushed under water. They took her down the cellar stair. They took her through the old oak door, and Corwin Vale, standing at the top of the stair with a lamp in his hand, said, "I am sorry, Wren, I truly am, but I have 900 people up here, and you are the only thing between them and a salt field, and you were never going to understand that." The door shut. Chapter 9. Ronan came for her at 2 hours before dawn and found the loft empty. Cassian found the sacking. Tam, of all people, found the blood in the yard, and the knife, and one of the 2 shifts trodden into the mud by 6 sets of boots. Ronan stood in the courtyard of Thornhold, with a child's salt-stiffened cloak in his hands, in the dark, and understood exactly what he had done. He had counted the men on the walls. He had been careful. He had been strategic. He had been, in every sense that mattered, correct. And he had let a room full of men call her a liar to her face, and he had let her walk out of it alone, and he had told himself he would explain in the morning, which is a thing men tell themselves when they have chosen the cheaper hour. Cassian said quietly, "We are 26. They are 40 in the walls and another 60 in the valley. If we do this, we do not walk out." Ronan said, "I know." Hallow said, "Majesty, we have a wagon of grain that will feed the western holdings until harvest. If we move on that girl tonight, we lose the wagon, we lose the pass, and we very probably lose you." Ronan said, "I know that too." Then he walked into the middle of the courtyard, where the wall torches were, and he raised his voice so that it carried into the guard rooms and up onto the walls and down the cellar stair and into every corner of that house. He said, "My name is Ronan of Ardenmoor, and I am your king, and I am going to say a thing I should have said 6 hours ago in your hall." He said, 6 hours ago I was asked to name a woman, and I lied. I said she was a servant of this house and nothing more. I said it because I counted your spears, and I thought a lie would keep her alive until morning." He said, "It did not. It got her taken instead. And I want every man on this wall to understand that I knew what she was when I said it." Then the Alpha King of Ardenmoor went down on one knee on the wet stone of another man's courtyard in front of another man's garrison. He said, "The woman you have been calling girl for 19 years is Alara of Silvermere. She is the heir of the Moon Court. She is the reason the sky has been covered since before most of you could walk. And she has been carrying your barley on her back in the dark twice a month while this house told her she owed it a debt." He said, "I am not asking Thornhold to fight for me. I am telling Thornhold what it has in its cellar." And then he stayed down. Nobody moved for a long moment, and then, on the north wall, one man put his spear down on the stone, which is a very loud sound in a quiet yard. He was a bowman named Corin, who had eaten Wren's bread every morning of his adult life. He said, over the wall, that she pulled his boy out of the mill race when the boy was 4, and went back to work with her sleeves wet, and nobody ever said thank you, including him. The second spear was a laundrywoman's husband. The third and fourth were the stablemen. It was not a mutiny, nothing so tidy. Perhaps a third of Vale's garrison simply stopped being part of it, and stood there, and let the king's men walk past them to the cellar door. And that was enough. Gant, with a cloth held to his broken nose, came out of the guardroom shouting for the gates, and Cassian put him against a wall and took the ring of keys off his belt, and Cassian said, "Thank you, steward," which Tam quoted for the rest of his life. 40 feet under all of it, in a round room of pale stone, Wren heard him. The cradle carried sound, it always had. She had known since she was 7 that if you stood in the middle of that room, you could hear the yard, thin and strange and far away, coming down the old shaft in the ceiling as though down a well. And she had spent whole childhood hours down there, listening to a house that never once said her name. She was sitting on the floor with her back against the basin and salt iron on her wrists and everything in her drawn down to a coal. And she heard, thin and strange and far away, a man's voice saying, "She is Alara of Silvermere." Wren put her head back against the cold stone and laughed, and then stopped laughing, because the water in the basin behind her had begun, very quietly, to move. Above her, the bolt went back on the old oak door. But it was not the king on the stair. Corwin Vale had come down first, and he had brought the lamp, and he had brought the key, and he was already turning it in the lock behind him. Chapter 10. Corwin Vale set the lamp down on the rim of the basin and sat on the bottom step, which was not what Wren had expected. She had expected him to stand. He said, "Ask." Wren said, "How long?" "Since you were 7, said Vale. Before that, you were too small. I gave you 4 years to get some weight on you." She said, "And what have I been doing?" And he told her, in the flat, unhurried voice of a man who had rehearsed it alone for 19 years and had never once had anybody to say it to. He said that the moontide is not a power. It is a debt the sky holds open. He said the moon court's air does not command it. She carries it, the way a riverbed carries a river. And that if you put salt iron on the air and cut a channel out of her, the tide will run where you point it. He said, "This valley is 900 people. This valley has bread. Every other valley from here to the sea has salt and gray flour and children with soft bones. That is not the sky's doing. That is mine. I did that, with a ring and a basin, and one girl who never asked what the duty of the house was." Wren said, "You burned Silvermere." Vale said, "No, that I did not do. I sold the road in. I told a raiding captain out of the south which of the winter gates was left unbarred, for money, because I was 40 years old, and Thornhold was 3 bad harvests from starving, and I had a garrison that had not been paid. I thought they would take the plate and go." He said, "They took the house." And when I understood what I had done, I rode down there through the snow to find something worth saving. And I found a child of 3, sitting in a burned room with her mother's cloak over her and not making a sound. And I picked her up. He said, "That is the part I have never been able to explain to myself. I could have left her. I have thought about it every year since. I picked her up." Wren said, "And then you put a ring of salt iron around her throat." Vale's face did something then, and it was the only time in her life she ever saw it. He said, "At a crossroads inn, 4 days out, with a smith's tongs, while she screamed." "Yes," he said, "and I brought her home, and I fed her, and I housed her. And I told myself I was keeping her alive, because the men who burned that house had orders to find her, and a dead princess is a closed matter, and a living one is a war." And that was even true. It was true for about 2 years. And then the fields came up green in a country of salt, and I stopped telling myself anything at all. Wren sat with her back against the stone and her wrists cold and looked at him. She had expected to hate him, and she found that she did, thoroughly, and that hating him was somehow not the largest thing in the room. She said, "What was my mother's name?" Vale said, "Ilaria. She had your hair." And Wren realized, with a kind of quiet horror, that this man had known her mother's name for 19 years, and had watched her scrub his floors, and had never once said it. Above them, muffled and far away, something heavy hit the cellar door. Vale did not even look up. He said, "They will get through it. It will take them an hour. It does not matter." He stood and came to the basin and looked down into the black water, and he said the last thing he had to say. He said, "I know what you are thinking. You are thinking that if you can put your hands in that water without the ring, and open it instead of letting me draw it, the whole of it goes back at once. And you are right. That is exactly what would happen." He said, "And it would take all of it. Not the 2 spoonfuls a month I have been taking. All of it. 19 years of held-back tide going through a girl who weighs 9 stone in one night." He said, "I am not lying to you to frighten you, and you know I am not, because I have never once had to lie to you about anything. You have been doing it for me since you were 7. Wren said, "And it would end. The salt, the gray bread." "All of it," said Valet. "And you." He picked up his lamp. He said, "So we will sit here, you and I, until your king breaks that door, and then he will take you home and put you in a good chair, and in 900 years somebody may work out how to undo this properly. That is the sensible road. I have kept you alive 19 years by taking the sensible road, and I am not going to stop tonight." And Wren, sitting on the floor of the room she had been fed into like coal into a furnace, thought about the rhyme. "The moon keeps nothing that is taken. The moon keeps only what is given." She thought, he has been taking. For 19 years, every single time, he has been taking. And she understood, all at once and completely, that nobody in the whole history of that basin had ever tried the other thing. Chapter 11. The door came down before the hour was out, because Cassian had gone and got the millbeam and 11 men. What came down the stair after it was a fight, and Wren, afterward, could never put it in order. She remembered Vale's household men in the stairwell. She remembered Tam, 17 years old, going past her with his shoulder opened and no expression at all. She remembered the sound of Corin the bowman shouting somebody's name. She remembered the king coming through the doorway. Ronan came in with a blade in his left hand and blood on his sleeve that was not his, and he saw her on the floor with the salt iron on her wrists, and Wren watched a man forget he was in a battle. He was across the room in 4 strides. He got both hands around the cuffs and pulled, and the salt iron did not care that he was a king. It did not even mark. Wren said, "Ronan." He said, "I am going to get you out." She said, "Ronan, listen to me." And behind him, Corwin Vale came off the bottom step with a short blade and put it into the meat above the king's hip, and Ronan went down on one knee with a sound Wren felt in her teeth. That was the moment. She has said since that there was no decision in it at all, and she has also said that it was the only real decision she ever made, and she does not think those two things contradict each other. She got up. She put her bound wrists over the rim of the basin, and she looked at the black water, and she said the words she had sung over bread since she was 4 years old. "The moon keeps nothing that is taken. The moon keeps only what is given." And Wren, who had spent 19 years having things removed from her without being asked, opened her hands and gave it away. The salt iron came apart. It did not break. That is the part nobody who was in that room can ever explain properly. It simply stopped being anything, the way ice in a hot cup stops being ice, and the cuffs went off her wrists in a fall of gray dust, because salt iron is made to hold what is taken, and there is nothing in the whole craft of it that has any grip at all on a gift. Then the tide went home. Wren put her hands into the water, and it went white. The letters around the rim of the basin came up burning silver, and the shaft in the ceiling filled with light. And the light went up it like water going up instead of down. And every man in that room went flat on the floor with his arms over his face. 19 years of held-back moon went out of a bondservant of Thornhold in about the time it takes to breathe twice. Up in the courtyard, men who had put their spears down looked up. The cloud over the northern mountains opened like a hand opening, and the moon came out full, edge to edge, whole, the first full moon over Ardenmoor since the winter of the burning, and it was so bright that the yard threw shadows. Cassian of Ardenmoor, 34 years old, who had never in his adult life worn his other shape, went down on all fours in the mud of that courtyard and came up on 4 legs, and made a noise that nobody who heard it has ever been able to describe. He was the first. He was not the last by a very long way. All down the valley, in the cottages and the byres and the guardrooms, the wolves of the north came back, and in the cradle, Corwin Vale stood over a kneeling king with a bloody blade in his hand, in the middle of a column of white light, and everything he had stolen went back out through him on its way home. He did not burn. It was quieter than that, and much worse. 19 years of another woman's inheritance came out of his fields, out of his walls, out of his hands, and went where it belonged. And it left him exactly what he had been before he ever rode south, which was a frightened man of 60, with nothing. The blade fell out of his hand. He sat down on the bottom step like a man whose legs had been taken away, and he began to cry. And he cried like that until they took him upstairs. And Wren, standing at the rim of the basin with her hands in white water and her hair burning silver from root to end, felt the last of it go out of her. She turned around. She got most of the way to Ronan. He caught her before she hit the floor. Chapter 12. She was not dead, but for 2 days nobody in Thornhold would have taken a bet on it. They carried her up out of the cradle and put her in the warden's own bed, which Nessa stripped and remade herself with her own linen because she said she would not have that girl lying on that man's sheets. Nessa did not leave the room. Neither, in any real sense, did the king. Ronan had a knife wound above the hip that needed 9 stitches and a fever of his own by the second night, and he sat in a chair by that bed through both of them. And when Cassian tried to make him lie down, Cassian discovered that a man can be king, wounded, and entirely immovable at the same time. On the second night, Elder Hollow came in and stood looking at her for a while and said, "Majesty, the valley is green." Ronan said, "I know." Hallow said, "No, you do not understand me. The valley is green, and so is the western holding. And the rider from the ford says the river ran sweet at dawn for the first time in 19 years, and half the town went down to taste it and came back crying." He said, "Majesty, she gave it back to all of it at once." Ronan said, "She gave it back, and I have been sitting here for 2 days doing arithmetic about how much of a person that was." And Wren, from the pillow, with her eyes shut, said, "All of it." Both men were on their feet. She said, "All of it. That is the joke. He told me it would take all of it, and he was right. And he never once in 19 years read the second half of the rhyme." She opened her eyes. They were gray. They were also, when the moon came through the window and lay across the bed, faintly and unmistakably silver at the edges. She said, "What is given to the moon comes back to you twice over." Nessa, in the corner, put her apron over her face. Wren said, "I am not the riverbed anymore, Ronan. I am not a channel anybody can cut. It came back. It is mine, and it is in me, and I do not think anyone is ever going to be able to take it out of me again." Then she said, "And my mother's name was Ilaria." Ronan sat down on the edge of the bed very carefully because of the stitches, and he took her hand. He said, "I know. She used to make us all sit through the counting of the moons every winter, and I hated it, and I was 9. He said, "Alara." Wren said, "I have been Wren for 19 years. Nessa named me. I am not throwing that away for anybody, including you." Ronan said, "Then be both. Half this country is going to call you the Moon Princess, whatever either of us wants, and the other half will call you the girl who poured the king a cup of water, and I have no power at all over which one sticks." She said, "Is that an apology?" He said, "No. The apology is separate, and I have had 2 days to get it right, so let me do it properly." And he did. He said that in her warden's hall he had counted spears and had judged that a lie would buy her a night, and that he had been correct about the spears and wrong about everything that mattered. He said that a woman who had been unnamed for 19 years had turned around in a room full of men and looked at the one person who knew what she was, and that he had let go of her in front of all of them to be strategic. He said, "I will spend a long time making that right, and I am not going to ask you to be finished being angry about it on any particular day." Wren was quiet for a while. Then she said, When you knelt in the yard, I heard you. It comes down the shaft. I heard the whole thing. She said, that is not the same as it not having happened. But I heard you. There was a long pause, and then she moved over about 6 inches on the bed, which in that house, at that hour, was practically a treaty. The king of Ardenmoor lay down on top of the blankets with his boots still on and slept for 11 hours. The hardest part was not the moon. The hardest part was the mornings after. Wren came down into the kitchen of Thornhold on the 5th day because she could not think where else to go, and the whole household was standing in it waiting for her, and not one of them knew what to do with their hands. They had called her girl for 19 years. Some of them had eaten food she made every day of their working lives and had never asked her name. And now she was standing in the doorway in a borrowed dress with silver in her hair, and they were all trying to work out whether they were about to be punished. Wren looked at them for a long moment. Corin the bowman, who had put his spear down, the laundry women, the stablemen, 2 kitchen girls who were 14 and terrified. And she thought, with great clarity, that she could have any single one of them out of this house within the hour, and that she had earned that, and that if she used it, she would become something she did not want to be. So she said, the ovens are cold, and there are 30 extra men in this valley, and I would like some help. That was all. She tied on an apron, and she baked with them until noon. And by the end of it, 2 of the laundry women were crying, and Corin had told the mill race story 4 times, and Nessa stood by the door with her arms folded, guarding it, so that no lord could come in and interrupt. The bond registers of Thornhold were burned that same week in the courtyard, all of them, in front of everybody. Wren did it herself. She said that a debt a child never agreed to is not a debt. It is a story a man tells to keep the labor cheap, and that she had it on very good authority, and Ronan, standing behind her, had the sense to say nothing at all. Corwin Vale came up out of his own cellars in chains, and the question of what to do with him went to the king, and the king gave it to her. Half the war band wanted him hanged. Cassian wanted him hanged, twice. Hollow made the case for a trial at High March and a long rope at the end of it. And it was a good case, and nobody in that hall would have argued with her if she had taken it. Wren said no. She said, if I hang him, then in 30 years the story is that a princess came back and killed a man, and that will be the whole of it, and Silvermere will still be a hole in the ground. So she sentenced him instead. Corwin Vale was stripped of the wardenship of Thornhold and of everything he owned, and sent south under guard to the ruin of Silvermere to work as a laborer on its rebuilding for the rest of his natural life, and to be told every morning by the master mason exactly what he was rebuilding and why. She ordered that he be fed and housed and never once permitted to leave. He asked to speak to her before they took him. She let him. He said, you could have made it quick. She said, I know. Stewart Gant, who had fled over the low road, was taken at the ford 4 days later by a farmer's wife with a hay fork and no patience whatsoever. He was sentenced to the same work at the other end of the same wall, and the 2 of them did not speak for years. And on a warm night at the end of that month, with the valley loud with things growing, the Alpha King of Ardenmoor found Wren sitting on the wall above the green terraces with her boots off. He did not make a speech. He said that he had a hall at High March with a bad roof, and a country that was going to need about 10 years of very hard work, and that he had been in love with her since a girl in a gray headscarf handed him a cup of water in a courtyard, and his wolf woke up out of 19 years of silence. He said, I am not asking you to come and sit in my hall and be a decoration. I am asking whether you would like to do the 10 years with me. Wren said, I have conditions. He said, of course you do. She said that Silvermere would be rebuilt, and that she would rebuild it, and that she would not be a guest in her own house. She said that Nessa was coming with her, and was never lifting a full pot again as long as she lived. She said that Thornhold's people would keep their own valley and their own harvest, and would answer to a warden they elected themselves. And she said, "And if you ever again decide in a room full of men that the strategic thing is to let go of my hand, I want you to remember how that went for you the first time." Ronan said, "I have thought about very little else." Then she took his face in both hands and she kissed him, and the moon came over the edge of the mountain and turned the whole terrace to silver, and neither of them noticed at all. Later, in a room with the window open and the smell of wet green fields coming up off the valley, he was very careful of her, and she told him to stop being careful, and he laughed against her shoulder and said that he had been careful for 19 years, and it had made him nothing but tired. She said good, and pulled him down, and the candle went out around midnight and stayed out. They were married at Silvermere in the spring, under a roof that was only half finished, which Wren insisted on because she said she wanted the sky in it. It happened on the night of the full moon, and every wolf in the north came. That is not an exaggeration. They came down out of the western holdings and up from the sea road and over the widow's stair, which Wren had reopened herself and which is now called the Cook's Road, to the enormous private satisfaction of one old woman. They came because for 19 years they had been locked out of half of themselves, and a kitchen girl had opened the door. Elder Hallow performed it, at 90, and wept through the whole thing, and told everyone afterward that he had been the first man in that hall to work out what the rhyme meant, which was almost true, and which nobody had the heart to correct. Nessa ran the kitchens at Silvermere for exactly 1 year before she declared herself retired, and then went on running them anyway, from a chair by the fire, giving orders, and in her 3rd year she married a widowed mason who had come north for the work and who thought she was the funniest woman alive. She lived to be 86. She is buried at Silvermere in the garden, under her own name, with a proper stone, and there is bread left on it every year on the longest night, which is a custom in that country now, and which nobody outside the family can explain. Cassian became warden of the stair, and married a woman from the ford who was taller than he was. Tam, who fell through an ice bridge at 17, was captain of Silvermere at 26, and told the story of the ice at every feast, and improved it every single time, and Wren let him. The people of Thornhold elected Corin the bowman as their warden, which he complained about constantly for the next 30 years. Corwin Vale worked on the east wall of Silvermere for 19 years, which somebody eventually noticed was exactly the number, and then died in his bed in a laborer's house within sight of it, having outlived his own name. The wall is still there. It is good work. That is the only mercy anyone ever recorded about him, and it is the one Wren intended. And the moon over Ardenmoor came full every month, in her season, the way she always should have, over sweet rivers and heavy barley and a country that had got its other shape back. Their daughter was born in the 3rd year, in the room with the tall windows that Wren rebuilt from a dream she had once had of snow coming down through a roof. She had her father's amber eyes and a streak of white hair at the left temple, and nobody ever taught her to hide it. Her mother taught her the rhyme instead, over bread, in the blue hour before the house woke. The moon keeps nothing that is taken. The moon keeps only what is given. And what is given to the moon comes back to you twice over. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Here is my question for you tonight. Which moment did you actually forgive Ronan for? The night he knelt in the courtyard and named her in front of everyone? Or the morning he sat by her bed and apologized properly with no audience at all? You can only pick one. Let me know in the comments. I read every one. If you would like more stories, there are plenty more on the channel. Much love, Sophie.